showing?
Oh, I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. Horrible frustration. Sometimes I have a temper tantrum because I was so frustrated.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Saturday live show. When I say live, I mean we recorded this live, but it's obviously pre-recorded. Anyway, guys, today it's awesome. It's a good day. I feel honored to have a special guest with me today, which has been a long time coming, I believe, because a lot of people have asked for me to be interviewing this guest. So today I am welcoming Dr. Temple Grandin to the show. Dr. Grandin, how are you?
I am just fine. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So for anybody who doesn't know, do you want to just give me like a quick summary of who you are and what you kind of do?
Well, I'm Temple Grandin. I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. And when I was a little kid, I had no speech till age 4. So very fortunate to get into very good early intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Had wonderful teachers. I also had a great science teacher mentor because I was a bad student who was not interested in studying until my science teacher gave me a lot of interesting projects. And then studying became a pathway to a goal of becoming a scientist. And that motivated me to study.
I love it. And so you're on the autism spectrum as well. So you have a diagnosis of what were you diagnosed with?
Well, I'm 74 years old. So when I went to the doctor, nobody even knew what autism was. First doctor I went to was a neurologist. She tested me for epilepsy. That was negative. Tested me for deafness and referred me to a little speech therapy school that 2 teachers taught out of their home and diagnosed me with minimal brain damage. And then later on, I definitely got an autism diagnosis. I had all of the classic symptoms.
Wow, that's interesting. And what kind of...
due to my age, doctors didn't know what it was.
This is fascinating. That is fascinating. And what kind of just out of interest, what were some of the traits that you were kind of, experiencing or showing?
Oh, I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. Horrible frustration. Sometimes I have a temper tantrum because I was so frustrated. Sensory problems. Loud noises hurt my ears. In fact, now I've discovered that if you have the child initiate the sound, let's say it's a car horn or a vacuum cleaner, where they turn it on and off, they can sometimes get to tolerate it if they control the dreaded sound. Sound sensitivity, couldn't stand scratchy clothes, socially awkward. When I was in high school, I got bullied and teased, and I was called tape recorder because I'd always say the same things over and over again, the same phrases. I didn't know why they were calling me that. The teenage years, absolutely the worst part of my life.
Yeah, I can vote for that too. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's such an interesting thing to hear somebody, of your generation having this kind of experience. It's just absolutely fascinating. But I thank you so much for sharing that information with us. I'm sure that's very valuable for the people who watch my channel. And just out of interest, a lot of people want to know, do you have a high IQ? I know it's a bizarre question, but do you know your IQ?
No, I had high enough IQ that they knew that I wasn't stupid.
Yeah.
My ability in art showed up very early when I was 8 years old. And I would draw the same horse head over and over again. And mother encouraged me to draw lots of different things and to broaden the skill. I can't emphasize enough the importance of developing strengths. I was one of these kids who's a visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. It's called an object visualizer. In fact, I discussed that in my book, The Autistic Brain, some of the science behind some of the different kinds of thinking. And being an object visualizer has helped me in my work with livestock equipment design because I can just see it, but I cannot do algebra. Absolutely cannot do algebra. And I'm saying a lot of kids that are object visualizers just can't graduate from high school if they can't do algebra. That's a lot of jobs you don't need that.
100%.
Some visual thinkers are very good with mechanical things. And then you have your math thinker, your visual spatial mathematics thinker. That tends to go together with music. And then, of course, you've got your word thinker. And you want to take the strength. And I want to just make one distinction between a strength and an interest. Things like art, math, or music, those are strengths. An interest might be horses or cars, something like that. That would be an interest. And people tend to mix those things up. What you got to do is broaden that interest. You can read about cars, do math with cars, broaden it.
That's perfect. Like you're speaking my language here. So I was diagnosed at 20. Well, so I'm 35 now. So a little bit younger than yourself. But back where I live in Wales is quite rural, right? And there was nobody to diagnose autism back in the 80s and 90s where I live. And
Yeah.
so I was diagnosed at 26, but I had some other diagnosis all the way up to that. But you know what you're saying about being a visual thinker? I totally relate to that. And I'm a chemist. I have a degree in chemistry, a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry. And so I was really into algebra, but I'm also a multi-musician. So I play a lot of different musical instruments, but I like maths and music. So it's kind of like, it makes sense.
That's more the mathematical mind, because what the science is showing, and I describe it in the autistic brain, and there's a lot more science that backs this up since that book was published. I'm an object visualizer. I think in pictures. You sound more like the visual spatial thinker because you were good at algebra. That's more of a pattern kind of thinking. It's visual, but it's more pattern. And that's a different kind of thinking than me, the object visualizer. Then you have a verbal facts guy. Then you have a lot of people, just regular so-called normal people that are verbalizers and that are total verbal thinkers. And it was a shock to me when I was in my late 30s to discover that other people did not think in pictures. That was really a shock to me.
Yeah, I'm 100%. I have this argument with my spouse all the time. I think in pictures, but she doesn't. And I'm like, I have to be visual. And especially when we're describing things, I have to have them like drawn out. It's difficult to read kind of like just written lists rather than if I don't see images of those,
When it's something like how to do something, I'd rather just see a diagram of it than read about it.
Right, I totally relate. So that leads me to the fact that we are here today, and I really thank you for your time as well. Is that you have a new book coming out, or it's already out, right? That you wrote with Deborah Moore.
Deborah Moore, Navigating Autism, and one of the things that's really important is developing the kids' strengths. I'm seeing too many kids where they get so hung up on the diagnosis that they're not accomplishing much. There's many famous people that are autistic. This is a book about Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. And these are post-it notes I put in here many years ago in the pages where I thought he was autistic. Mm-hmm. He's now come out on a comedy show.
Yeah.
And in all seriousness, has revealed that he's on the autism spectrum. Einstein, No Speech Until Age 3, would probably be in an autism program today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so autism's going all the way from someone like Elon Musk, Einstein, okay, myself and you, to somebody who cannot trust themselves. And it's all got the same name, which from a service standpoint, educational standpoint, doesn't really make very much sense. It's a behavioral profile. It's not an exact diagnosis like saying you have the Delta variant of COVID. That's an example of an exact diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So your new book, Navigating Autism, right? So who's this book kind of aimed towards? Who's it written for?
It was originally aimed more at professionals and try to get them sort of out of the just getting stuck in the box with the labels. There's a lot of crossover between autism and ADHD. About a third of the symptoms, the brain scan stuff, the genetic information crosses over. So that's why those get mixed up. I've designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. And I worked with a lot of really talented welders, machinery designers, people that have 20 patents. And I'm going to estimate that about 20% or so of the people I've worked with that were laying out entire big factories were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And I am saying that seriously. And one of the worst things the schools did is take out all the hands-on classes, auto shop, welding, art, cooking, sewing, woodworking, because these are all classes that can lead to really good careers. And in the US right now, we've got a huge shortage of high-end skilled trades and people that can fix equipment in factories, run logistics problems. We've got horrible supply chain management problems. And you need people like me who can't do algebra to help make stuff work.
Yeah, 100%. That's super important as well. So like, a lot of like your work is based on like your own understanding of who you are and your kind of autistic, reality, I guess. Why do you think it's important to share the knowledge that you've learned about yourself, with other people?
Because I think it can help other people. I see too many parents, and maybe this is more of a problem in my country than yours, I'm not sure. But a lot of parents overprotect their kid that I see situations where you have a smart kid in high school doing really well who's never gone shopping, never had a bank account, not learning just the basics of life. I was shopping when I was 7. Yeah. And people will say to me, well, why do you just tell about your own experiences? You see, my mind thinks in specific examples. Verbal thinkers are very top down. Okay, you got to learn life skills. But when I look back at things I was taught in my generation, like having an allowance and learning how to save for a toy airplane, I'm realizing now the really important skills that taught me. And kids are not having that. And that's why I came out with some other kids' books like Outdoor Scientist, get kids off the devices.
That's cool.
And get them outside doing things. We've got to get these kids doing things. And they're often reluctant to do things. But being a bottom-up thinker, when I was a teenager, I didn't have very much data in the database. So I'd make associations that were kind of nonsense. And as I got older and I got exposed to more and more things, then I could think better. And I've had parents say to me, when they finally got their kid out on their first job, they'll tell me he just blossomed. That's because he's getting exposed to more things. Now, for good first jobs, we got to avoid multitasking. Don't stick them on the McDonald's takeout window. Also, any task that involves verbal sequence, give them a written pilot's checklist of the sequence. I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. Never have been able.
I get it. Do you know, it's really interesting because I think there's a lot of that, you know, like one of the things that I'd say has strengthened my life, I can relate to what you're saying, is that when I was a kid, obviously not being diagnosed with autism until I was in my 20s, my parents put me to a mainstream school, right? And they were just like, okay, go to this club, do that thing. And I was forced to be in those circles. So I learned loads of those things, like, you know, being a kid I wasn't bubble wrapped, basically. I know we spoke a little bit about this before we started recording, but my parents never bubble wrapped me. They just kind of pushed me out there. And I think one of the, it was a bit of a struggle, like the social interaction, like you said, you know, I was a bit more of a robot and kids didn't really understand me, but, you know, I learned so much from being in those situations. I think that it's super important. And it's nice that you talk about that.
Well, I think it's really important because I have a lot of grandparents that come up to me in good jobs, engineers, accountants, various different jobs, and they discover they're on the spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a few older adults that get relieved when they get a diagnosis because it explains their relationship problems. The other thing for me, I was getting bullied and teased. The place where I had friends was friends who shared interests. Mm-hmm. I cannot emphasize that enough. Friends through shared interests. And in high school, for me, it was horseback riding and model rocket club and electronics lab. And for somebody else, it might be art, it might be music, it could be a choir, it could be a lot of different things.
Yeah, no, I do this little course on my website, and one of them is how to make friends, and I'm trying to teach, you know, the parents try and encourage those shared interest classes, like if it's a Minecraft group, or if it's like you said, if it's a modeling club or a, you know, Pokemon card club, it's those kind of shared interests that you're going to build that relationship with, because it's going to be effortless communication, right? You're going to already know each other, like the same things.
And no, that's absolutely right. And that's where those are the places I had friends. In fact, one enterprising mom with Minecraft had a bunch of wood blocks cut up and had the kids paint and sand them to have Minecraft blocks in the driveway. Or you could save up the boxes from all the home deliveries you get and tape them up and paint them and have giant Minecraft blocks.
That's a cool idea.
And that's something, it's really easy to do. And this one kid became the hit of the neighborhood with his Minecraft blocks.
Whoa, that's cool. That is very cool. Do you know what's funny? I have a strong relationship with Minecraft because I did my dissertation or my thesis in chemistry. I actually built a teaching tool in Minecraft to teach kids how to use molecular symmetry and group theory, which is quite a difficult thing for some people to grasp. But
now, you know, are you working in chemistry right now?
I'm not currently. No, I'm a social media influencer, which is, you know, this channel and my social media channels and stuff. So that's what I do now. But unfortunately, I was going to do my PhD and they closed the chemistry department down in my local university. So
that's too bad.
Yeah. It was.
I mean, I do a lot of consulting about autism now, but I still think it's important. I'll still be a professor of animal science. I'm teaching my class. We're back now with masks on, in-person classes. It's wonderful doing an in-person lab last week, cattle handling, and still doing research projects involving animals, horses and cattle. And I think it's important, like to have some other career other than autism.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree, because it's kind of like it's that outlet, isn't it? Like, I love researching and stuff like that. So I love researching different types of kind of more like biochemistry stuff. And it's just such a nice outlet to do stuff like that. And I think you're right. Maybe I should do more. All right.
I think you need to get your chemistry models out there. I also want to emphasize, I'm sorry about interrupting. This is a problem I still have. I cannot time, my processor speed's so slow, I cannot time when exactly to cut into a conversation.
It's okay. That's not a problem. And I do the same thing. So I think we're just going to, it's just us for 20 minutes talking over each other. But in terms of the book, you talk a lot about something called the whole child. What is it? Why is that so vital? Like, what do you mean? Can you explain that a little bit, that idea?
Well, the problem is, in a lot of cases, they just look at the label, and they don't look at other things about the child, like maybe he's good at music or good at math, or like some other, interests and other things he's good at. They just look at the autism, and you need to look way beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I know what you mean. It's like looking at the person as a whole, rather than just looking at that small section that you can control, right? It's like, what else can we do here? What else can this child do?
I'm seeing too many people getting sort of locked into the medical model, and then they kind of assume the child can't do anything. And we need to be getting these kids out doing more stuff. Mother would always give me choices. And then she realized that when I got tired in the big noisy environments, I might start screaming. She kind of had a good sense of how to stretch me, giving me choices to do things. Like when I was a teenager, I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch. And that's one of the reasons why I got into the cattle industry. And my mother said, you can go for a week or you can go all summer. Not going is not an option. But if you hate it, you can come back in a week. She always gave me some choices. She had a very good sense of how to stretch me without throwing me into a situation where it would just be too overwhelming to handle it. Got out to the ranch and I loved it.
Good. Sounds like your mother really understood who you were, right? My parents really didn't, unfortunately. But it sounds like your mother really got who you were. She was very in tune with you, from what you're saying.
Well, she's very much visual thinker. She was doing a lot of like semi-professional theater stuff when I was a child. She was very artistic. At our little school fair, she helped them put on plays, and she was very, very creative.
No, it's lovely. It's lovely. So, you advocate for customized interventions, right, for children with ASD. What do you mean by that? I would love to kind of get a more.
Well, let's say sensory problems, for example, are really, really variable. One kid's got sound sensitivity. Another kid may have visual sensitivity, where certain fluorescent lights or LED lights will flicker. That would be an example of something customized. One of the things that is known now is that sensory integration types things, the AIRS sensory integration, that is now an evidence-based treatment that you would do along with speech therapy or behavior therapy or some other thing. Also, I always say to parents, you need to have an effective teacher. And what's that? You get progress. If it's little kids, more speech, more turn taking. I was taught how to wait and take turns, more basic skills. I always ask parents, they said, well, should I be in that program or that program? And I always ask, is your kid improving? Okay, tell me how much more speech he's gotten. I don't like abstract stuff. This is one thing I learned from 25 years in steel and concrete and mechanical construction at factories. I don't like abstractions. Okay, tell me exactly how he's progressed. Less tantrums. Are the sensory problems getting less severe? Can he dress himself? Is he learning shopping? Okay.
Yeah.
Things I can visualize. You see, I don't think abstractly. Thing I'm learning about the verbal thinker, the regular neurotypical verbal thinker, is they have a big overgeneralization, but they don't know how to implement things. You see, both my mind, the visual thinker, and your mind, the math thinker, we're bottom-up thinkers. Concepts are formed from specific examples, and you get a whole bunch of specific examples, and you can put them in different categories. and verbal thing is very, very top down, and they don't plan. Okay, we're supposed to have an inclusive school. Well, how do we do this?
Yeah.
You see, when I think about that and thinking about, well, here's a situation that did not work, and I see it, and here's another situation that worked fine. One teacher started a Star Wars club because an autistic kid liked Star Wars, and that enabled him to get friends. That was a really simple thing to do, but that's specific of a specific example of something that worked. Because I've had people write on the chat, well, Temple just talks about her own experiences, or I talk about somebody else's experiences.
Yeah.
But my mind works in specific examples.
Yeah, of course.
I'll tell you something that does not work for a job.
Yeah.
Take an 18-year-old girl, shove her in a chaotic, busy clothing store at Christmas time as a first job, and you start it at Christmas time. That did not work.
No. That was, I wouldn't say that was a good thing to do.
That was a bad mistake. I talked to that family and said that was a bad mistake.
Yeah.
Let's try something quieter, like the clothing store, not at Christmas time. Here's a success. There's an autistic guy at an auto parts store, and that's relatively quiet. I've been in the auto parts store here, and they loved him. He didn't need the computer. He memorized every part number for every part in the warehouse.
That's excellent. No, it's good. It's a good example. Okay, so here's the last question about the book then. In the book, you kind of focus on different types of medical conditions that are associated with autism. And so how can, additional conditions impact or affect a child's progress if they're autistic?
Well, let's look at autism. Let's check for epilepsy.
Okay.
That is I hate the word comorbid. I think it's an awful term.
It's a weird term, isn't it? I agree.
It simply means when two conditions coexist together. Yeah. To me, it sounds like something's dead.
Yeah, that's what I said.
A lot of medical terminology I don't really like. Yeah. But you can get, ADHD and autism often go together. Yeah. You can get OCD and autism together. Gastrointestinal problems and autism tend to go together. There's research that shows that.
Yes.
So those are examples. Autoimmune problems. I had genetic testing done on me, and it explained why I'm missing 6 adult teeth. I've got small teeth. My skin is messed up, and my brittle nails just break off. What's been learned about the autism is many, many, many genes contribute to that. The same genes that make the brain big in humans are the same genes involved with schizophrenia and autism. And there's hundreds of them. It's polygenic. What's that mean? Lots of little tiny bits of code contribute.
Yeah.
The simpler genetics explains why I have brittle nails. That's simple genetics. And I also learned from it that I had a bleeding disorder. And if I ever have a hip replacement, they have to be very careful not to give me too much heparin. I could bleed to death.
Wow. That's interesting.
So that was something I learned from it that could save my life.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, goodness me. I actually have my comorbid, my coexisting conditions. So I have ADHD, which I take medication for. I also have dyslexia, and I also have extreme eczema as well. So my skin.
I have eczema too. I've got that too. Had it as a child.
Yeah,
I have eczema too. That tends to go together. See, that kind of fits in with a lot of the kind of autoimmune abnormalities and things like that. But another thing is a lot of famous scientists and musicians and stuff. I've been looking up Michelangelo, Isaac Newton, Tesla, the inventor of the power plant.
Yeah.
Edison.
Yeah,
probably on the autism spectrum. Because a brain can be more cognitive or thinking, or a brain can be more social emotional.
Yes.
It takes processor space for this stuff. And I tend to be more thinking. Like I find it really interesting to have long conversations about animal behavior or long conversations about supply chain logistics. I just find this stuff like really super interesting.
I totally agree with things like that. Like I can talk for hours about things. A lot of the time is marketing, online marketing and SEO building, and how you market a product online. I just love talking about that stuff. I actually consult with companies about that, as a
Good.
side hustle, but I love it, And some of the companies, they were like, oh, we're just starting up, we haven't got a lot of money. I say, look, I'm just going to do it because I love doing it. I just love talking about it and trying different things and testing things because like you were saying about the supply chain. On the internet, to market a product on the internet, what if say you're launching a course or a book, there's a certain line of distribution that happens there, and that has to be optimized.
Well, I can remember when the internet all started, and everybody just thought it was just going to be in a computer. Well, now you have huge warehouses that create the supply chain. You have huge data centers full of miles and miles of computer servers in gigantic warehouses. And I like to ask young students where the movies live online.
Oh, yeah.
I love to ask them that. And some will say in a satellite, in a cell phone tower. And I'm going, really? And then some will say, yeah, a server. But then when I show them how big the warehouse full of servers is, it just blows their mind.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I think Facebook's got some servers in Alaska, and they've opened the top just to cool them down.
Well, that's the problem, you see, and they put them in cold places, but there's a huge physical infrastructure.
Yeah, it's enormous.
And one of the problems we got today with a lot of young people, because we've taken out the practical things, you got young people that are going to grow up and make policy about stuff, and they don't have any idea how anything works.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
Actually work.
Yeah.
I had a student in my class who had never measured anything with a ruler. That was this year.
Oh my goodness. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Wow. So, Temple, your book, when is the book out? Is it out already? Where can we get it?
In the US, it's going to be, I think it's September 20th. It's right around there. It's coming out in the US. And then, of course, I've got my own book, Thinking in Pictures, where I talk about my own autobiography, and it's just come out with a new afterword.
Oh, cool.
A new updated afterword.
And you can get these on Amazon, I'm guessing?
Yes, yeah. Everything that I have, and then Deborah Moore also has another book I worked with her on, The Loving Push. And one of the things we discussed in that book was all the problems with video game addiction. I'm seeing so many kids get addicted to video games, and they're not getting jobs. They're not working for game companies. No. They're just playing video games all day. And I tell parents, you've got to get that under control. You don't ban it, but it's got to be
it's going to be structured.
And because they're not having good outcomes.
No, I did a documentary with the BBC about that exact thing, and it was almost aimed towards teenagers, and we were trying to get them to realize the difficulties that you may have if you become addicted to video games, and that's all you do. And it was startling, the figures of people who are addicted to video games. It's uncomprehendable.
And let me tell you where there's been some successes. I know of 3 young adults weaned off of video games. It was replaced with auto mechanics.
Okay.
Because a lot of visual thinkers are good with mechanical things. And one of them now works for railroad and fixes trains. And they really like them. And it tends to be some of the visual thinkers and math thinkers that are getting addicted to them. The verbal thinkers probably don't care that much about them. And in autism, you can get all 3 of the different kinds of thinking. And the difference with an autistic person is you'll be an extreme visualizer, or an extreme visual spatial math person, or an extreme verbal person. So-called normal people are more mixtures of the different kinds of thinking.
Yeah.
But there's scientific research that shows this actually exists. But we got to wean them off and replace that video game with something else. And I'm not saying that auto mechanics is for everybody, but for my kind of mind, the mechanical thing is really a really good field, because I worked with people that designed equipment like for meat factories, and they were my kind of mind. I worked with a guy who was a stutterer, autistic, dyslexic, terrible student, took a single welding course, now owns a big metal fabrication company and sells his equipment around the world.
Holy smokes.
See, this is what makes me kind of crazy as I go back and forth between the autism world and the industrial world.
Yeah. Dude, it's fascinating. I think I could talk to you for hours about everything, because we have quite a lot in common. So where could people find you? Do you have a website, or do you have like a
I have templegrandin.com is my autism website.
Okay.
And I have grandin.com is my livestock website.
Okay.
I've got books listed on both of them. Amazon has got all my books.
Okay.
Also, I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, and I can be tracked down through the university website.
Excellent. Okay. And do you have any social media handles?
I let other people handle that.
Okay.
Maybe I'm really showing my age here, but
no.
But one thing I do is I try to answer correspondence, and the other thing I've tried to do is write up a lot of stuff. I've got this other book, The Way I See It, a lot of little short chapters. Some of it's my experience. One of the things I've discussed in Thinking in Pictures is I take medication. I've been on antidepressants for anxiety since 1980. They saved me.
Yeah.
And if anybody's interested in that, I really strongly recommend reading Thinking in Pictures, because I don't want any misunderstanding about the medication. So I'd rather have you read it.
I'd love to read that, actually. I might get that today.
In Thinking in Pictures, and you get into all this discussion about medication, and you get the same discussion about dogs, because Prozac works on dogs, and it works on people. And should you give dogs Prozac? Well, let's give the dog more exercise and more interaction with people first.
See how he gets on.
Yeah, then let's see. But on the other hand, I can't be totally against medication. You've got a dog that comes in and is totally scared, or he tears apart the vet clinic. Then it might be good to give it a sedative before you bring it in. But that doesn't mean you just do it to every dog. This is where the sensible thing to do is something sort of more in the middle. There's way too many medications given out to young children. Way too much. And heavy-duty medications with bad side effects.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But, I can agree with you. I started taking medication about 4 years ago because I got to a point where, because having ADHD and autism, kind of like it was just bad. It was a bad. I just couldn't rock myself out of a bad condition. So I started taking an antidepressant that was kind of designed and treated for people who were diagnosed with Asperger's, right? Which is what my diagnosis was. And it's so far, I feel great. It's really helping me a lot.
Well, that's good. And I went on old-fashioned antidepressant that's so old that it's before Prozac and stuff like that was invented. The thing I want to warn you, low doses.
Yeah.
Too often I've had people say, oh, it did great on a low dose. We doubled the dose. And then you got agitation and insomnia. The other big mistake that people make once they get stable on a really good med is they think, oh, I can go off of this. I've seen some real messes with that.
Yeah, I was thinking that recently. I had this thinking, I feel great, maybe I could, but I don't think it's not a good thing. And, I did it because I'm not like I'm against medication. I just thought like I'm quite I'm going to, muscle through this. I'm going to figure out these problems myself. But it got to a point where it was kind of breaking point. I just felt I was so low. I had to take
Well, what happened to me is I went through my 20s, I got more and more and more anxious just over nothing. And my health was coming apart. Colitis attacks that just wouldn't stop. All kinds of stress-related health problems. And I went on the antidepressant, and 3 days later, it was like, wow, this works. Now, depression doesn't lift in 3 days, but my problem was anxiety. That lifted within 3 days, and that's why the chapter in Thinking in Pictures is called A Believer in Biochemistry.
Yeah.
Because it was wow. Yeah, and you get the right med, one little med, that's all I take. And
I can totally agree, because I got to a point, my anxiety was so bad that when the mailman would, between 8 and like 9:30 in the morning, the mailman would post the letters to the door, but it made me so anxious. I just couldn't concentrate.
Well, that's just getting anxious over nothing, you see, right? And that's the same thing that was with me. Any little thing, I was just having a panic attack over it. I kind of look at it like, okay, there's if you know old-fashioned carburetors, they've got an idle adjustment screw.
Yep.
Well, it was like my fear center, and I've since learned from brain scans that my fear center is 3 times larger than normal, was revving up like just the RPM meter, just maxing out. And then when I took the medication, it like turned the idle adjustment screw on the old-fashioned carburetor. And I still have cycles of anxiety, but instead of going, I'm going to have to use English measurements here, 200 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, I'm now going 100 miles an hour to 75 miles an hour.
Yeah.
In other words, it's still cycles, but it
lower.
like ramped everything down. And I don't know what would have happened to my health if I had not taken the medication. I would have had to have, really invasive treatments to get the colitis stopped, and the colitis almost completely cleared up.
Wow.
When I went on the medication. I still now have a little bit of problems with it, but it's very minor compared to what it used to be.
It's incredible. And so, yeah, I mean, meds can work very well.
Well, they can work really well, and then used wrong, I see way too many bad things where I'll talk to a parent and the kid's on like 7 medications.
Yeah.
And I asked the parents, well, what kind of thought went into it? And then I'm finding out that they were just throwing prescriptions at it, throw 3 meds at it at a time.
Yeah.
Instead of trying something carefully and seeing what's going to work. You don't start 3 of them at the same time.
Yep.
And I find when I talk to them, there's no thought went into it.
Yeah, that is the problem. Yeah, and a lot of the time, the doctors are just trying to sell the med at the end of the day because there's somebody taking a commission somewhere, and they're saying, "Well, we'll try this one out." And so,
well, sometimes that's true, but I think some of it also is just get them to quiet down, get out of my office, and throw a prescription at it.
Yeah.
Because I talk to a lot of low-income families, and that's where I really see some of these problems. And the doctor's super busy and doesn't have time to carefully ask the questions and troubleshoot it.
Yeah. There's no. It's more of a conveyor belt, right? Just here's a prescription.
Oh, that's the problem. And the other thing I'm finding on a lot of these, some people say, well, meds are terrible. You should never use them, or just drown everybody in meds.
Yeah, it's got to be a balance.
The sensible thing to do is the younger the child, less meds I like to use. But I was one of these young adults where meds saved me. A single little med saved me.
Mm-hmm. And I think, that's a good thing to say, because I think there's a fine line. Yeah, you have to have that balance between finding the right amount of medication, but just testing the one that you need. You don't need to drown yourself in medication to feel better, or even to just help with the situation. You just need the right one at the right time. But yeah.
And the only side effect basically I have is I have to drink a lot of water. But that's a side effect I can live with. And you've got to get and there's a whole bunch of different medications in the same medication class. So you can try different ones, and they're slightly different. Just different enough so they don't violate each other's patents.
Yeah. I had to stop taking a sleep medication to take my my kind of prescription medication, because they would kind of overlap and could be all kinds of stuff going on. But anyway, again, I could talk to you for hours, Dr.
Well, the
Grandin.
other thing I found that helps, I have to do a burst of hard, vigorous exercise every day in order to sleep. 100 sit-ups every night. Hate them. And I was having sciatic nerve problems, and I switched to kind of push-up things but I've got to do this burst of hard exercise. Walking doesn't do it every day, and that also is very helpful.
I hear you. I have to do the same thing. I have to run at least 3 miles to get that. That's what my head went. I just came in, I had a run, I had a shower, and then we did this interview. So I totally understand. It's so bizarre how we have the same kind of things, but I have to have that really intense, because
it's intense. Yeah. Because when I was traveling all the time and doing, I added up how much airport walking I was doing, and it was several kilometers.
Just wasn't
airport walking, and that just didn't seem to do it. And I spent more time doing the airport walking than I did doing the burst of hard exercise. And the burst of hard exercise was much more effective than walking. Yeah. Now I still do walking for my back. Like when I was during all the lockdowns, I walk around the neighborhood every day just for my back. But I've been getting back out on the road traveling traveling in the U.S. and loving it.
Right, Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm sure everyone's going to be interested in this new book. I will leave all the links that we discussed in the show notes and in the description of the videos. So please check out Dr. Grandin's book, the new book, which is Navigating Autism. Very excited for you guys to check that out.